How to guitar playthrough part 3, color grading. So in the last 2 episodes, we went over filming our actual playthrough, going over camera settings, lens choices, lighting settings, as well as editing using a multicam, setting up proxies for smooth playback, and setting up our lookup tables. If you haven't seen the last 2 episodes, check them out right here, or I'll leave a link in the description down below. So our first step in our color grade, if you're shooting log profile especially, is to remove our LUT, or lookup table, so that we're back to a flat profile. The second important thing is that we're going to unlink our proxy media because we want to see our full resolution image to make sure that we're making proper color choices. So now that we have that all set out, let's get into the whole color grading. Color grading will be different depending on your camera. So for my camera, you can see all my footage looks kind of gray. It looks very dull. And that's because I shoot in a profile called log. Very flat, but it allows you to get more dynamic range. And basically dynamic range, think of it as like MIDI, like drum MIDI. So drum MIDI starts from 1 to 127. For instance, my camera has 14 stops of dynamic range. You can imagine that my camera goes from like 20 to 100. And then something like a Red, like those cinema cameras, they have, I think, around 17 stops of dynamic range. So those ones, for instance, in this example, would go from 1 to 127. So another thing to keep in mind is that I'm shooting 10-bit footage. 10-bit footage is more color information. So if you're using Davinci Resolve, the free version, you won't be able to import 10-bit footage in the free version. You have to have the studio version. So if you're able to input footage into the free version, you're shooting 8-bit or lower. Believe it or not, 2 bits of less of color information is a lot. I'm gonna go through my process with 10-bit footage. While I'm doing it, I'll point out things that you want to avoid when you're using 8-bit. Just because you'll get things like banding. If you don't know what banding is, it's like when you're watching something and there's like all these lines or there's like blocks. You want to avoid that because it doesn't look good. And that usually happens when we're pushing colors. And you'll see what I mean when we get into it. Usually a hero shot is showing like the main character, a powerful stance or a powerful shot. So what I usually do with guitar playthroughs to find my bass grade, I find the angle that I like the most. So first off, we have this one, which is pretty cool. We have this one, which I like a lot. This one's okay. It's not my favorite, but I like the angle more than I like the amount of luminance and the amount of light that we have going on. This one's interesting, to say the least. This one's really cool, but it's tough because there's a lot of blue going on. This one's probably the safest because we got a little bit of blue, not too much shadow, and a good amount of luminance, as well as having that motivated light in there. So we're gonna use this as our hero shot. So next we're going to go into the color management tab, which is right here. If you hover over it, it'll tell you color. So we're in the color. This is what it looks like. If this stuff isn't showing, these little tabs up here, it's our settings, it's our clips, our timeline, our nodes. These are called nodes. Think of it as like putting your plugins in a certain order, except we have like a graphic illustration of what it looks like. Say this is your compressor, this is your amp, and then let's say this is your master. So you can see when you click on each footage, it'll bring you to like the beginning of it, and then it'll show you your node tree. This is called a node tree. But I'm just gonna go over the basics. So when you open it up, it should look like this. This is our vector scope, and basically it's showing us where all of our colors are. And since we're in like a log profile, it's all pretty flat. And this line here, if for whatever reason it's not showing up on yours, you can go into these options and go show skin tone indicator. This is where our skin tones should be. The closer to the middle, the less saturated. The more on the outskirts, the more saturated. So first things first, if you're not shooting in a log profile, you won't have to do this. So if we want the most flexibility in our image, we can go into our settings down here, or we can go into here and go project settings. And then if you haven't set your color management, it's usually on Davinci YRGB. I'm gonna switch it to Davinci YRGB color managed. Turn off automatic color management, and instead of 709, I'm going to go into Davinci wide gamut intermediate. Basically, this is just going to give us more range, and it's going to give us more accurate representation of our settings over here. If you're not shooting in log, you don't need to do this, but the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to add 2 nodes. So if you want to add a node, you can right click on this one right here and go add node. Usually we're going to add serial nodes, just like that. And the shortcut for Windows is to do Alt-S. We'll add a new one, and then to label it, same thing as like most things in Windows, you just press F2, output, and then this one's going to be input. 2 color space transform nodes. Basically all you have to do is click it, drag it over here. If you're not seeing this, it's because your effects aren't showing. What we're gonna do is just transform the whole color profile. So since I'm on a Panasonic camera, I'm gonna switch it. So my input color space is Panasonic V gamut. Just click here and press P. If you're on Canon, you go to Canon, and then you basically just set it to whatever profile you're in. So Canon has like 3 different options. Sony, I think, also has 3 different log profiles. Panasonic only has 1. It's a really good color profile. So you can instantly see it just completely transformed the image, and it's extremely dark, and we have a lot more saturation. Since we set our input, which is our camera footage, we're going to set our output. And since we set in our project settings, we went to Davinci Wide. We're going to just go into output color space and go press D. And we're going to get Davinci Wide gamut. And then we're going to go here. We're going to press D again. And we're going to go Davinci Intermediate. And again, we have flat footage. We're going to go into our output one, put another color space transform. Since we're outputting Davinci Wide gamut from here, we're going to go into here and input Davinci Wide. Davinci Wide, Davinci Intermediate, and then our output, basically everything on the web is going to be in a Rec 709. You don't need to know this, just know that when you're color grading, you want to be on Rec 709. So it's going to be our output. To disable a node, you can go, on Windows at least, Control D, and that'll disable it. If you want to disable everything in the node tree, you don't have to select it all. You can just go Alt D and it'll disable everything. We can zoom in. The wonderful thing about Davinci is basically everything, middle click on your mouse and move stuff around, which I really appreciate. So I'm just going to zoom in. With these 2 nodes, we went from this flat image, as you can see on our vectors right here. You can also see more windows by clicking on this right here, and it'll give us our parade, which is, our parade is going to show us our whole color scheme, red, green, blue, RGB. So we went from that. I'm going to go Alt D. When I'm shooting on my camera and I have like the whole conversion built into the camera, this is what I'm seeing. So you can see with adding it, we've taken our image and we've stretched it and it's saturated it. Saturation's gone a lot. And then we've also stretched our image. So now down here is our shadows and darks and blacks. And up here is our whites and highlights. We're clipping the shadows. So our blacks are completely black rather than being like more gray or a little bit lighter. And then up here, we're not clipping yet. So now let's add a node. I'm going to click on here and go Alt S. So basically the last node that you click on, it will add a node right after that one. I'm going to keep all of my color space transforms up here just to keep them in one spot. So this node right here is going to be my highlight control. I'm just going to name it high. This one's going to be my primaries. If you want to learn more about Davinci Resolve, I really love Waqas Qazi. He has a channel and he goes through all of his color grading process. You're going to see a lot of similarities between mine and his because I learned a lot from his videos. We're going to be using our primaries just to boost the image to get the right amount of brightness and shadows, as well as to just correct any color shift that we have. First thing I'm going to do, I'm going to go into my effects and then go to qualifier, and basically wherever I have my qualifier over here, you'll get some sort of circle. And that's basically telling you where your colors are. And yeah, let's just hover over our skin tones. So we can see this is the yellows, the reds, the magentas, the blues, the cyan, and the green. You can see when I go over my skin tones, I'm sitting slightly yellow on all of them. Slightly yellow, slightly green. And you can see my footage in general is leaning towards the yellow and the green side. So real quick, before we adjust that, let's just get our composition and our light the way that we like it. I'm going to go gain up just a little bit. And it's going to bring my whole brightness up. So let me disable that. Gone quite a bit, really close to clipping on the skin tones, which I don't like. So let me bring those down a little bit. For me, I find that the gamma is all about like the richness and the more like mid-tone and brighter side. And the lift is more the shadows. So if I raise the lift, it'll look like dustier. See how it adds like that dust? It's raising the shadows, so it's adding dust. So if you lower it, you'll get more of that contrast look. But then we're also dropping the shadows from going to our lift. And then I'll sit with a more flat, less contrasty image. And then we can drop the gamma to bring a bit of the richness back. And just in that alone, we've brightened up the image, we've brightened up the shadows, we've brought the highlights up as well. So at some point later, we're going to go into our highlight node and we're going to drop the highlights. Now that we've raised the volume or the brightness, let's move our offset. So this is the best way to just correct everything in general. We're going to go into our offset, and we can see here We're leaning towards green and yellow. As you can see, the opposite of green is magenta, the opposite of yellow is blue. So if we lift the blues a bit, we'll go on to just our blue channel. I'm basically just looking over here and I'm just trying to flatten my image. I'm trying to get it corrected before I add my vibe to it. So I'm a little bit too green. I'm gonna get rid of some green. And you can see the more we get rid of, the closer on that line we are. But now, look at our skin tones. They're a lot more in the magenta and the reds. So maybe we went too far with the greens. Let's bring it back a little bit. And now we're basically on the line. So in that one node, we've brought it from there to there. You'll start to see all the intricacies. Like right now when I'm looking at this, I can see it looks a little bit more yellow and a little bit more green. And that looks a lot more red, maybe too red. So let's bring this back a bit. And I kind of like the yellow vibe, so I'm gonna bring my blues down just a bit. At this point, I'm fully aware that I'm sitting more in the reds, and you can see a general slope red, green, blue. That's because there is a lot of red in this image. My skin tone is a bit more red. My guitar has a lot of red in it. The keyboard has red, and the brick has red. And I'm fully aware that we're sitting a little bit more in red in general. I will later correct this, but at this point, I'm basically just flattening the image to make sure that my skin tone is the tone that it should be, and that we're on that skin tone line. So now that we have our color adjusted and we have our image a little bit more centered, we're gonna start adding vibe. So I'm going to add a next node. This is gonna be my contrast. And then right here in our contrast, I'm just gonna boost it a bit. I kind of go to the point where the guitar starts to pop out more. For you, it might be different, but with your contrast, you don't want to go too far to the point where it looks fake and it looks like extremely edited, but you want to get to a point where there's pop in the image and the thing that you want to be seen is popping. I'm gonna go too far. I'm not even looking at the image, I'm just going at the contrast. So we can see our shadows are getting deeper into the blacks and our highlights are getting closer to the whites. We've gone way too bright on that and it looks fake as hell. So let's go back from original, and now I'm gonna look at my image and realize where I see the guitar popping. That looks pretty good to me. I don't like to go too far because for me, shooting with a high dynamic range camera, I like to show the dynamic range as opposed to like just not having any range. So now we can choose the pivot point, and pivot you'll see chooses like where the contrast starts between the lights and the darks. So if we go all the way to 0, it's starting on the lights. If you go all the way to 1, it's starting on the darks. I like to just go until I see that pop even more. So right around there, usually around 3 is really good, 0.3. So this is our difference, no contrast, contrast. I'm gonna add a few more nodes. This one's gonna be a fix. This one's going to be my grade, my HSL. This one is where we're gonna have issues with 8-bit footage, and I'll show you the workarounds and the ways to get cleaner footage. Before anything, I'm actually just gonna hop into my HSLs because my issue in general with this entire playthrough is that the blues, I don't really like the hue of the blue that I chose for this RGB light in any of the shots, to be honest. First things first, I'm gonna go into my curves. Curves are down here. And this is our overall custom curves. I'm gonna go into here, which is our hue versus hue. And I really don't like these blues. Since we're on the qualifier, we can go and click here and it'll show us that blue, but see how narrow that is? I might be able to get away with that with 10-bit footage. You will not be able to get away with that with 8-bit footage. So again, if you're using like a cheaper camera, if you're using your iPhone, if you're using something like that, you don't ever want to be doing things like this. If you're going to do something like that, you're going to want to definitely broaden the range. Something like that. Even more probably. You'll start to notice some color issues. So now I'm going to go here and I'm going to change the hue. You can see it's going a lot more green. You can see it's going more like pink and purple. I like it blue, but I want it a little bit more of like a greener blue. So I personally like that a lot more. So we've gone from this to this. I usually do this way. I'm just going to go reset node. And now I'm going to just go to my blues. Click right here. See how broad that is? I feel like it's like a much smoother transition. So you'll see. And that over there, that's nice. Obviously go too far, experiment and find what you like. Don't go too far to the point where it looks fake. I couldn't tell that this is shot like this. And that's the whole point in the color grading process. We want to make it natural, but give it a look. Let's add our color grade. So this is our color correction phase here. And then this is going to be our color grade. Since we saw that messing with the lift kind of adds like a dusty look and it's messing with the shadows, makes it look dreamy and stuff like that, this is where we're gonna push our main color. So what's popular in the YouTube world, what's popular in films and cinema is like an orange and teal look. So basically, see how we have the color wheel? Usually having like opposite colors looks really nice because they're complementary. Let's go for this whole like teal and orange kind of look. So let's push a little bit of the greens. We're gonna go too far, it's gonna look kind of weird, but don't worry because we're gonna correct it with our gamma here. So we got quite a lot of greens in there. And we're gonna go with like a teal cyan kind of look. I want a little bit more green than blue. So we've got that. Should we go less red? And that's pretty wonky compared to that to this. So now, since that's our like dusty kind of feel, we're gonna go in the gamma, which is like the richness and more of the highlights, more of the skin tones, more of just the midtones in general. And with this one, I'm gonna go the opposite. The whole point of this is to get separation in our image. So I want the skin tones and the midtones and the highlights to be a certain feel and a certain vibe, and I want the rest to be in their own world. That way we have more pop in our footage. So in order to do the opposite, we got green, blue, less red. Let's go more red. Let's go less blue. Or less green, sorry. And then always check your skin tones. We're sitting pretty good. And just in that node, we've gone from this to this. I'm gonna leave it here because often I overdo it and then I have to deal with it later. So the image is looking pretty cool. We have that contrast. This is looking a little bit blue and green, and then our guitar and our midtones are looking more red and yellow, which is really nice. So I have this fixed node before, and this is one of Qazi's tips. So now we have this contrast between our shadows being a bit more blue and our rich tones being a bit more red and orange. Or we can see in the hair, we're getting a lot of like that blue look. This was my hair before, and then now we're getting a lot of that greenish, tealish blue. So this is what we use the fix node for, and this time I'm gonna go into my HDR sliders right here. You wanna keep your skin color accurate, and you wanna make sure that your black points are black and your white points are white. Everything else in between, feel free to add your color grade and feel free to add your vibe. So we're gonna go into this fix node, and then I'm gonna go into my dark point. To solo out anything in Davinci Resolve, you go Shift and H, and you'll see that when I move this as my pivot point, anything that's showing is gonna be affected. And if I go all the way down, basically this is just my blacks and my dark points. So I need a little bit of my hair to show. Make sure that my hair, for the most part, is covered. My darks are covered. Our look is mostly green and blue. So let's get our darks to be the opposite. So we're gonna go over here. The opposite of blue and green is gonna be up here. Our red, magenta, yellow. So let's push it until we're noticing that we're bringing our natural colors back. And look at that. It's kind of subtle, but also kind of not at all. We've gone from that bluish look in between everything. So far, with our grade, we've gone from this to this. The blue was way too blue before we fixed it with the HSL slider. You can see on the couch, it just looks strange. The contrast is very strong. And now we have a bit of a grade. So a good point right now, actually, real quick, I'm gonna go into my highlight and I'm gonna go into this qualifier zone. And basically you can either click, which I don't suggest because that's where we're gonna get into those weird banding issues. I'm just gonna set my luminance here, which is basically my brightness point. So again, let's go Shift H. We can set our luminance there by, this is our low softness. So you can see it's adding a ramp. Go there, and then we're gonna kind of just move it until we only get those extreme highlights. You can see the lights coming in, my hands. This hand here, I guess, is getting more of the light, so that's the issue to me. Cool, so now we've selected that. I'm gonna go Shift H again to get rid of it. Go highlights here and drop it down. And then we'll see a lot of the recovery there. It's a lot more flat, less contrasty, but we're not blowing out. And that's at 100%. I don't want to go that far, but I just wanted to show you that technique. I'm going to get it to a point where I'm cool with the amount of highlight. And that to me looks nice. There's the whole thought of whatever's brightest in the image is what your eye goes to. And although this is technically brighter, this is like the hand that I'm focusing on this one, on this specific shot. Usually I'll do this next step within the HSL sliders, but I'm gonna add my own node for it just so you can see what this is doing and I can easily A/B and compare it. So now we're gonna add a little bit more contrast or the opposite of contrast depending on what we wanna do. This is our look adjust. You'll see this is our absolute white point, this is our absolute black point. So you'll see when I move the whites this way, everything on our parade here gets brighter and our image starts to get a little bit crazy. And then the opposite, if I grab it and go down, you'll see the highlights drop and our image is getting a little bit flatter in a dynamic range look. And then same thing with the black point here. If we raise it, we'll get less blacks and less shadows. And this is kind of like film photography look. And I like the less contrast kind of look with film photography. That's what I really like about it. Our reds are really clipping in the shadows, but there's only so much I can do to resolve that. And I don't really care to resolve it because I'm okay with there being absolute black points. But I want to bring those absolute black points to a point where they're right around here. Before, after. And it almost adds like a little bit of mist around everything. And to me, that looks a little bit more cinematic. And then I can do the opposite with the highlights if I want, but let's pretend that we want to drop them a bit, flatten our image a little bit. That's really nice. And then what we can do now is go over here and go into editable splines. I can easily just grab my spline and go up like this. So it's going to curve all of my highlights and whites up. Or I can do the opposite and it brings it down. And then I'll do the same thing with the shadows. I'm going to shorten the amount of spline by dragging. And if you want to get more shadow information, you bring it up. If you want to get less, you bring it down. I like where that's sitting right now. So this is with it, before and after. It's very subtle. Like I said, I don't like extreme contrast. I like the image to pop and just be pretty high in dynamic range. That's why I spent a lot of money on a nice camera. Cool. And then of course, if you wanted to, you could like boost the midtones or drop them down a bit. To be honest, I'm not sure if the free version of Resolve has this one. Library here, we're going to go into search, we're going to go into glow. So glow does exactly what it says. It chooses a highlight or white section, and then you choose the threshold, and then it'll give it like a glow or a bloom or whatever you're looking for. This is our threshold here. You can go into shiny regions or glow alone. Dropping the shine threshold will allow more things to glow, as you can see here. And then let me go into glowing image so we can actually see the result. And look at what it's doing. So that's obviously extreme. We can go into our spread and bring it in. And it gives it like that 300 or like super sharp, weird effecty one. And especially look over here to see what it's doing to bloom it out. Film has a nice controlled roll off from the highlights to the shadows. So this kind of makes it a little bit more filmic. A lot of people will put a, a black mist or a pro mist filter on their camera to basically do exactly this. This is nice because I didn't have to commit to that. I can do it later. I'm going to show you what Qazi's trick is. You should check out his videos because he's honestly amazing. We're going to take our shine threshold and throw it all the way down so it's affecting everything. We're going to put our spread all the way down so that it's like super sharp. And then we're going to go to our composite type over here. And instead of add, you can mess with all these and you'll see like completely different results. What he likes to do is soft light. Everything's being affected, but more so the highlighted sections. And I like to go quite subtle with it. Obviously, this is what it looks like, not subtle at all. I like to just go 0 and then bring it up slowly till I'm at a point where I like it. You can kind of see instantly as soon as we start bringing it up, it's just adding detail. So we're only at 27% without, with it. Let's go into our qualifier again. Right here, there's our qualifier. And then we're gonna do the same thing we did with the highlights. So I'm gonna basically get my low point, move it over, my low softness so we have a bit of a ramp. Shift H, just so we can see what we're highlighting. Bring it all the way out. And now we can see what we're grabbing. So this grabs everything. This, we can see the guitar is starting to pop, the hand's starting to pop, everything like that. And I don't necessarily want to get the background in here. And then now, let's mute or disable the glow. Like that. Crazy difference. I liked where it was around like 2.5. That's looking really nice. And then the last note I'm going to add to make it look a little bit more filmic, I'm going to add grain, which is funny because nowadays everybody's talking about low light performance in cameras and trying to get the best camera performance because you don't want to get grain. But then we add grain in later to make it look more filmic. And if you can't see what I'm talking about, let's zoom in a bit. And let me turn it on and off. Notice the detail. Look at the grain that it's adding. I'm not sure how you'll be able to see it in YouTube. Choose our custom grain or whichever grain preset we like. So there's presets here. It changes every time. I try all of them basically. But ones that I really notice that I like are the archival print looks really nice. I actually really like this reversal one, looks crazy, and this 400 one as well. So what it's adding is a little bit of that grain that's like really taking over every music video that's out right now. It's really popular right now, but it's always been popular. If you look at movies, there's always some sort of grain. Sometimes there's overkill grain that looks like this. And this is what that new, I can't remember which Kendrick Lamar music video it is, but there's a music video where the grain is just psycho. I like the archival print. It's adding a lot of texture to our image. That way you feel like you're watching something a little bit more expensive and quality. Our highlights are a little bit too bright still. So maybe I'm gonna go into my primaries and go back a little bit on the grain, or on the gain, sorry. I still like it being pretty bright. I'm just gonna go a little bit less on the highlights. Let's go -40 instead of -30. So let's recap what we've done. We've taken our flat log footage, and then I've added my input and output color space transforms just to bring it to a Rec 709 output look. And then we've added our primaries to get the brightness up and to correct our color in general so that we're a bit more on the line there. Added our contrast just to get it a little bit sharper. We've added our grade, giving it that greenish, bluish, teal and orange kind of look. And then I added my fix to make sure that our shadows are close to accurate. So this is without the grade, with the grade. Very subtle, but it does a lot to me. It gets more of that separation. Everything's looking red, now we have separation. Then I added my HSL just to correct that blue that I really disliked. And we got more of like a teal, comfortable look. Then I added the look adjust, which I usually do on the HSL. Just to add extra curves and to add a little bit of the dust that makes it look a little bit more filmic. And then we added that glow trick to make the guitar pop and to make everything else a little bit darker. Really nice. Then we added our grain just to bring it into that filmic look. And then of course the highlight node, just to drop the highlights so that we're not really close to whites. And that's our look. The easy way to copy all of this onto another piece of footage, let's say click here, and then middle click on the footage you like, and it adds all of that. And then we'll have to go in and correct, but basically we're just gonna look at all of our sliders here. We're gonna try to get it close to here. Our white and black levels, we're gonna try to get close, and as well as our saturation. You can see here, we got way too much brightness, way too much whites, way too much blues. We're gonna go through and just correct it a bit. I will link a video that goes through this technique. So now I've color graded and shot matched every shot so that they're accurate and nothing's too jarring. As you can see, as I scrub through, we're sitting within the same blues. Everything's in the same range that it should be. Nothing stands out as being like, that's weird. My next step, personally, I really like the color green. I really like it in my footage, and when I'm taking photos, I really like my color green. So since everything is already shot matched, I can go into the footage and add more green into everything and then have to copy and paste everything. Or another easy, quick way to do it is to add something called an adjustment layer. For Davinci, we're just gonna go into our effects tab right here. And then right within effects here, we're gonna see adjustment clip. And basically, I've already put one in, but I'll show you my process. We just take it, drag it down, and since it's gonna be affecting the entire clip, I wanna make sure that it's dragged out the entire region. Now I just click on it and I can go into my color management tab down here. And it's hard to tell, but if I go into my timeline right here, the top right, I'm selected on my adjustment layer. So now anything that I change will be just on the adjustment layer. So this is a quick way to add final effects to your entire shot or to your entire selection that you choose the adjustment layer to be there for. So for me, I liked a little bit more green and yellow. That's what I personally just love those colors. I don't know why. They just look really nice to me. So this is the one that I went with. And you can see it's quite subtle, but it just adds a little bit more green and yellow. So I'm basically just lifting a little bit of red and green in my lift, and then I'm also lifting a little bit of red and blue in my gamma, and a little bit of color boost. So again, this is with it and without, without. So now that we've got all of our editing and our color grading done and we're super happy with it, we're gonna export and render it. So basically we wanna set an in and an out point so that the program knows this is where it starts, this is where it ends. Don't render anything less or more. The song starts right there with a little bit of pre-roll before, a little fade in. So I'm gonna press I sets the end point, which is where it starts. And and then I'm gonna go to the end, say right here, and then I'm gonna click O, and that sets the out point. Before I forget, now that we're done all of that, if you've seen the past episodes, I switched my timeline setting to be 1080 instead of 4K. And it's important to go back to our project settings. From 1080, go back to 4K so that it actually exports as 4K. That's all good. And now when we export, we wanna make sure this is 4K. It should be the frame rate that you've set it to. And then now it's important to look at YouTube's recommendations for file size and file type. They recommend H.264 and MP4. So let's do that. Format, MP4, H.264, file name it whatever you want. I basically don't change any other settings other than right here where it says quality and it goes to best. I don't want to do that. I want to go into YouTube's recommendations, and they recommend for your bitrate for 4K, if it's HDR, it should be 44 to 56 megabits per second. And if it's SDR, then we want to be between 35 and 45. 44 or 45 is safe. So we're going to go down to restrict because we don't want it to go any more than that, and go 45,000. And now when we export, we're going to have the highest quality that YouTube recommends. So set your save location, which I've got right here, and then just go add to render queue and render all. So this will conclude our how-to guitar playthrough tutorial series. We've gone over how to film, how to edit, color grade, and export. I appreciate you all watching. Thank you so much. If you found any use in this video, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. It really makes a difference. And I wish you good luck on your journey. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time. See ya.